Section 29 of the Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Arabian Nights Entertainments, Volume 2 by Anonymous. Translated by Dr. Jonathan Scott, 1754 to 1829. The story of the Prince Amgiad and a lady of the city of magicians, Part 1. For a whole month Prince Amgiad never went out of the tailor's house without being accompanied by his host. At last he ventured to go alone to the bath. As he was returning home, he met a lady on the way. Seeing a handsome young man, she lifted up her veil, asked him with a smiling air and a bewitching look whither he was going. Amgiad was overpowered by her charms, and replied, "Madam, I am going to my own house, or, if you please, I will go to yours." "My lord," resumed the lady with a smile, "ladies of my quality never take men to their houses. They always accompany them to theirs." Amgiad was much perplexed by this unexpected reply. He durst not venture to take her home to his landlord's house, lest he should give him offence, and thereby lose his protection, of which he had so much need in a city which required him to be always on his guard. He knew so little of the town that he could not tell where to convey her, and he could not make up his mind to suffer the adventure to go unimproved. In this uncertainty he determined to throw himself upon chance, and without making any answer went on, and the lady followed him. Amgiad led her from street to street, from square to square, till they were both weary with walking. At last they entered a street, at the end of which was a closed gateway leading to a handsome mansion. On each side of the gateway was a bench. Amgiad sat down on one of them, as if to take a breath, and the lady, more weary than he, seated herself on the other. When she had taken her seat, she asked him whether that was his house. "You see it, madam," said Amgiad. "Why do you not open the gate, then?" demanded the lady. "What do you wait for?" "Fair lady," answered Amgiad, "I have not the key. I left it with my slave when I sent him on an errand, and he cannot be come back yet. Besides, I ordered him afterwards to provide something good for dinner, so that I am afraid we shall wait a long time for him." The prince, meeting with so many obstacles to the satisfying of his passion, began to repent of having proceeded so far, and contrived this answer in hopes that the lady would take the hint, would leave him out of resentment, and seek elsewhere for a lover. But he was mistaken. "This is a most impertinent slave," said the lady, "to make us wait so long. I will chastise him myself, as he deserves, if you do not, when he comes back. It is not decent that I should sit here alone with a man." Saying this, she arose and took up a stone to break the lock, which was only of wood, and weak according to the fashion of the country. Amgiad gave himself over for a lost man when he saw the door forced open. He paused to consider whether he should go into the house or make off as fast as he could to avoid the danger which he believed was inevitable, and he was going to fly when the lady returned. Seeing he did not enter, she asked, "Why do you not come into your house?" The prince answered, "I am looking to see if my slave is coming, fearing we have nothing ready." Come in," resumed she. "We had better wait for him within doors than without." Amgiad, much against his will, followed her into the house. Passing through a spacious court, neatly paved, they ascended by several steps into a grand vestibule, which led to a large open hall very well furnished, where he and the lady found a table ready spread with all sorts of delicacies, another heaped with fruit, and a sideboard covered with bottles of wine. When Amgiad beheld these preparations, he gave himself up for lost. "Unfortunate Amgiad," said he to himself, "thou wilt soon follow thy dear brother As'ad." The lady, on the contrary, transported at the sight, exclaimed, "How, my lord, did you fear there was nothing ready? You see your slave has done more than you expected. But if I am not mistaken, these preparations were made for some other lady, and not for me. No matter, let her come. I promise you I will not be jealous. I only beg the favor of you to permit me to wait on her and you." Amgiad, greatly as he was troubled at this accident, could not help laughing at the lady's pleasantry. "Madam," said he, thinking of something else that tormented his mind, "there is nothing in what you imagine. This is my common dinner, and no extraordinary preparation, I assure you." As he could not bring himself to sit down at a table which was not provided for him, he would have taken his seat on a sofa, but the lady would not permit him. "Come, sir," said she, "you must be hungry after bathing. Let us eat and enjoy ourselves." Amgiad was forced to comply. They both sat down and began to regale themselves. After having taken a little, the lady took a bottle and glass, poured out some wine, and when she had drunk herself, filled another glass and gave it to Amgiad, who pledged her. The more the prince reflected on this adventure, the more he was amazed that the master of the house did not appear, and that a mansion so rich and well provided should be left without a servant. "It will be fortunate," said he to himself, "if the master of the house do not return till I am got clear of this intrigue." While he was occupied with these thoughts and others more troublesome, she ate and drank heartily, and obliged him to do the same. Just as they were proceeding to the dessert, the master of the house arrived. It happened to be Bahadur, master of the horse to the king of the magicians. This mansion belonged to him, but he commonly resided in another, and seldom came to this, unless to regale himself with 2 or 3 chosen friends. He always sent provisions from his other house on such occasions, and had done so this day by some of his servants, who were just gone when the lady and Amgiad entered. Bahadur came, as he used to do, in disguise and without attendants, and a little before the time appointed for the assembling of his friends. He was not a little surprised to find the door broken open. He entered, making no noise, and hearing some persons talking and making merry in the hall, he stole along under the wall, and put his head halfway within the door to see who they were. Perceiving a young man and a young lady eating at his table the victuals that had been provided for his friends and himself, and that there was no great harm done, he resolved to divert himself with the adventure. The lady's back was a little turned towards him, and she did not see the master of the horse, but Amgiad perceived him immediately. The glass was at the time in his hand, and he was going to drink. He changed colour at the sight of Bahadur, who made a sign to him not to say a word, but to come and speak to him. Amgiad drank and rose. "Where are you going?" inquired the lady. The prince answered, "Pray, madam, stay here a little. I shall return directly." Bahadur waited for him in the vestibule, and led him into the court to talk to him without being overheard by the lady. When Bahadur and Amgiad were in the court, Bahadur demanded of the prince how the lady came into his house, and why they broke open his door. "My lord," replied Amgiad, "you may very reasonably think me guilty of a very unwarrantable action, but if you will have patience to hear me, I hope I shall convince you of my innocence. He then related in a few words what had happened, without disguising any part of the truth, and to show him that he was not capable of committing such an action as to break into a house, told him he was a prince, and informed him of the reason of his coming to the city of the magicians. Bahadur, who was a good man, was pleased with an opportunity of obliging one of Amgiad's rank, for by his air, his actions, and his well-turned conversation, he did not in the least doubt the truth of what he had asserted. "Prince," said Bahadur, "I am glad I can oblige you in so pleasant an adventure. Far from disturbing the feast, it will gratify me to contribute to your satisfaction in anything. Before I say any more on this subject, I must inform you my name is Bahadur. I am master of the horse to the king of the magicians. I commonly reside in another house which I have in the city, and come here sometimes to have the more liberty with my friends. You have made this lady believe you have a slave, though you have none. I will personate that slave, and that this may not make you uneasy, and to prevent your excuses, I repeat again that I will positively have it to be so. You will soon know my reason. Go to your place and continue to divert yourself. When I return again and come to you in a slave's habit, chide me for staying so long. Do not be afraid even to strike me. I will wait upon you while you are at table till night. You shall sleep here, and so shall the lady, and tomorrow morning you may send her home with honor. I shall afterwards endeavor to do you more important services. Go, and lose no time." Amgiad would have made him answer, but the master of the horse would not suffer him, forcing him to return to the lady. He had scarcely re-entered the hall before Bahadur's friends, whom he had invited, arrived. Bahadur excused himself for not entertaining them that day, telling them they would approve of his reason when they should be informed of it, which they should be in due time. When they were gone, he went and dressed himself in a slave's habit. Prince Amgiad returned to the lady much pleased at finding the house belonged to a man of quality, who had received him so courteously. When he sat down again, he said, "Madam, I beg 1,000 pardons for my rudeness. I was vexed that my slave should tarry so long. The rascal shall pay for it when he comes. I will teach him to make me wait so for him." "Let not that trouble you," said the lady. "The evil is his. If he is guilty of any faults, let him pay for it. But do not let us think of him. We will enjoy ourselves without him." They continued at the table with the more pleasure, as Amgiad was under no apprehensions of the consequence of the lady's indiscretion in breaking open the door. The prince was now as merry as the lady. They said 1,000 pleasant things, and drank more than they ate, till Bahadur arrived in his disguise. Bahadur entered like a slave who feared his master's displeasure for staying out when he had company with him. He fell down at his feet and kissed the ground to implore his clemency, and when he had done, stood behind him with his hands across, waiting his commands. "Sirrah," said Amgiad with a fierce tone and angry look, "where have you been? What have you been doing that you came no sooner?" "My lord," replied Bahadur, "I ask your pardon. I was executing your orders, and did not think you would return home so early." "You are a rascal," said Amgiad, "and I will break your bones to teach you to lie and disappoint me." He then rose up, took a stick, and gave him 2 or 3 slight blows, after which he sat down again. The lady was not satisfied with this chastisement. She also rose, took the stick, and fell upon Bahadur so unmercifully that the tears came into his eyes. Amgiad, offended to the last degree at the freedom she took, and that she should use one of the king's chief officers so ill, called out to her in vain to forbear. "Let me alone," said she. "I will give him enough, and teach him to be absent so long another time." She continued beating him with great fury, till Amgiad rose from the table, and forced the stick out of her hand, which she did not relinquish without much struggling. When she found she could beat Behader no longer, she sat down, railed at, and cursed him. Behader wiped his eyes and stood up to fill out wine. When he saw they had done eating and drinking, he took away the cloth, cleared the hall, put everything in its place, and night coming on, lighted up the lamps. Every time he came in or went out, the lady muttered, threatened him, and gave him abusive language, to Amgiad's great regret, who would have hindered her, but could not. When it was time for them to retire to bed, Behader prepared one for them on the sofa, and withdrew into a chamber, where he laid himself down, and soon fell asleep, having been fatigued with his beating. Amgiad and the lady entertained one another for some time afterwards. The lady, before she went to bed, having occasion to go to another part of the house, passing through the vestibule, heard Behader snore, and having seen a sabre hanging up in the hall, turned back and said to Amgiad, "My lord, as you love me, do one thing for me." "In what can I serve you?" asked the prince. "Oblige me so far as to take down this sabre and cut off your slave's head." Amgiad was astonished at such a proposal from a lady, and made no doubt that it was the wine she had drunk that induced her to make it. "Madam," said he, "let us suffer him to rest. He is not worthy of your farther notice. I have beaten him, and you have beaten him. That ought to be sufficient. Besides, I am in other respects well satisfied with him." "That shall not satisfy me," replied the lady in a violent passion. "The rascal shall die, if not by your hands, by mine." As she spoke, she took down the sabre from the place where it hung, drew it out of the scabbard, and prepared to execute her wicked design. Amgiad met her in the vestibule, saying, "You shall be satisfied, madam, since you will have it so, but I should be sorry that anyone besides myself should kill my slave." When she had given him the sabre, "Come, follow me," said he. "Make no noise, lest we should awaken him." They went into Behader's chamber, where Amgiad, instead of striking him, aimed his blow at the lady, and cut off her head, which fell upon Behader. Behader was awakened by the head of the lady falling upon him. He was amazed to see Amgiad standing by him with a bloody sabre, and the body of the lady lying headless on the ground. The prince told him what had passed, and said, "I had no other way to prevent this furious woman from killing you but to take away her life." "My lord," replied Behader, full of gratitude, "persons of your rank and generosity are incapable of doing such a wicked action as she desired of you. You are my deliverer, and I cannot sufficiently thank you." After having embraced him, to evince the sense he entertained of his obligations to him, he said, "We must carry this corpse out before it is quite day. Leave it to me, I will do it." Amgiad would not consent to this, saying, he would carry it away himself, since he had struck the blow. Behader replied, "You are a stranger in this city, and cannot do it so well as one who is acquainted with the place. I must do it, if for no other reason, yet for the safety of both of us, to prevent our being questioned about her death. Remain you here, and if I do not return before day, you may be sure the watch has seized me, and for fear the worst, I will by writing give this house and furniture for your habitation." When he had written, signed, and delivered the paper to Prince Amgiad, he put the lady's body in a bag, head and all, laid it on his shoulder, and went out with it from one street to another, taking the way to the seaside. He had not proceeded far before he met one of the judges of the city who was going to the rounds in person. Behator was stopped by the judge's followers, who, opening the bag, found the body of a murdered lady bundled up with the head. The judge, who knew the master of the horse notwithstanding his disguise, took him home to his house, and not daring to put him to death without telling the king, on account of his rank, carried him to court as soon as it was day. When the king had been informed by the judge of the crime Behator had, as he believed from the circumstances, committed, he addressed himself to the master of the horse as follows: "It is thus, then, that thou murderest my subjects to rob them, and then wouldst throw their dead bodies into the sea to hide thy villainy? Let us get rid of him. Execute him immediately." Innocent as Behator was, he received sentence of death with resignation, and said not a word in his justification. The judge carried him to his house, and while the pale was preparing, sent a crier to publish throughout the city that at noon the master of the horse was to be impaled for a murderer. Prince Amgiad, who had in vain expected Behator's return, was struck with consternation when he heard the crier publish the approaching execution of the master of the horse. "If," said he to himself, "anyone ought to die for the murder of such a wicked woman, it is I, and not Behator. I will never suffer an innocent man to be punished for the guilty." Without deliberating, he then hastened to the place of execution, whither the people were running from all parts. When Amgiad saw the judge bringing Behator to the pale, he went up to him and said, "I am come to assure you that the master of the horse whom you are leading to execution is wholly innocent of the lady's death. I alone am guilty of the crime, if it be one, to have killed a detestable woman who would have murdered Behator." He then related to him how it had happened. The prince having informed the judge of the manner in which he had met her coming from the bath, how she had occasioned his going into the master of the horse's pleasure house, and all that had passed to the moment in which he was forced to cut off her head to save Behator's life, the judge ordered execution to be stopped, and conducted Amgiad to the king, taking the master of the horse with them. The king wished to hear the story from Amgiad himself, and the prince, the better to prove his own innocence and that of the master of the horse, embraced the opportunity to discover who he was, and what had driven him and his brother Asad to that city, with all the accidents that had befallen them from their departure from the Isle of Ibene. The prince having finished his account, the king said to him, "I rejoice that I have by this means been made acquainted with you. I not only give you your own life, and that of my master of the horse, whom I commend for his kindness to you, but I restore him to his office, and as for you, prince, I declare you my grand vizier, to make amends for your father's unjust usage, though it is also excusable, and I permit you to employ all the authority with which I now invest you to find out Prince Asad." Amgiad, having thanked the king for the honour he had done him, on taking possession of his office of Grand Vizier, used every possible means to find out the prince his brother. He ordered the common criers to promise a great reward to any who should discover him, or give any tidings of him. He sent men up and down the country to the same purpose, but in vain. Asad, in the meanwhile, continued in the dungeon in chains. Bostama and Cavama, the cunning old conjurer's daughters, treating him daily with the same cruelty and inhumanity as at first. The solemn festival of the Odors of Fire approached, and a ship was fitted out for the fiery mountain as usual. The captain's name was Bahram, a great bigot to his religion. He loaded it with proper merchandise, and when it was ready to sail, put As'ad in a chest, which was half full of goods, a few crevices being left between the boards to give him air. Before the ship sailed, the Grand Vizier Amgiad, who had been told that the adorers of fire used to sacrifice a Mussulman every year on the fiery mountain, suspecting that As'ad might have fallen into their hands, and be designed for a victim, resolved to search the ship in person. He ordered all the passengers and seamen to be brought upon deck, and commanded his men to search all over the ship, which they did. But As'ad could not be found. He was so well concealed. When the Grand Vizier had done searching the vessel, she sailed. As soon as Bahram was got out to sea, he ordered Prince As'ad to be taken out of the chest and fettered to secure him, lest he should throw himself into the sea in despair, since he knew he was going to be sacrificed. The wind was very favourable for a few days, after which there arose a furious storm. The vessel was driven out of her course, so that neither Bahram nor his pilot knew where they were. They were afraid of being wrecked on the rocks, for in the violence of the storm they discovered land and a dangerous shoal before them. Bahram perceived that he was driven into the port and capital of Queen Margiana, which occasioned him great mortification. This Queen Margiana was a devout professor of the Mohammedan faith, and a mortal enemy to the adorers of fire. She had banished all of them out of her dominions, and would not suffer their ships to touch at her ports. It was no longer in the power of Bahram to avoid putting into the harbour, for he had no alternative but to be dashed to pieces against the frightful rocks that lay off the shore. In this extremity he held a council with his pilot and seamen. "My lads," said he, "you see to what a necessity we are reduced. We must choose one of two things, either to resolve to be swallowed up by the waves, or put into Queen Margiana's port, whose hatred of all persons of our religion you well know. She will certainly seize our vessel and put us all to death without mercy. I see but one way to escape her, which is, to take off the fetters from the Mussulman we have aboard, and dress him as a slave. When Queen Margiana commands me to come before her, and asks what trade I follow, I will tell her I deal in slaves, that I have sold all I had but one, whom I keep to be my clerk, because he can read and write. She will by this means see him, and he being handsome and of her own religion, will have pity on him. No doubt she will then ask to buy him of me, and on this account will let us stay in the port till the weather is fair. If any of you have anything else to propose that will be preferable, I am ready to attend to it." The pilot and seamen applauded his judgment and agreed to follow his advice. Bahram commanded Prince As'ad's chains to be taken off, and had him neatly habited like a slave, as became one who was to pass for his clerk before the queen of the country. They had scarcely time to do this before the ship drove into the port and dropped anchor. Queen Margiana's palace was so near the sea that her garden extended down to the shore. She saw the ship anchor and sent to the captain to come to her, and the sooner to satisfy her curiosity, waited for him in her garden. Bahram landed with Prince As'ad, whom he required to confirm what he had said of his being a slave and his clerk. When he was introduced to the queen, he threw himself at her feet and informed her of the necessity he was under to put into her port, that he dealt in slaves and had sold all he had but one, who was As'ad, whom he kept for his clerk. The queen was taken with As'ad from the moment she first saw him, and was extremely glad to hear that he was a slave, resolving to buy him, cost what he would. She asked As'ad what was his name. "Great queen," he replied with tears in his eyes, "does your majesty ask what my name was formerly, or what it is now?" The queen answered, "Have you two names, then?" "Alas, I have," said As'ad. "I was once called As'ad, most happy, and now my name is Motar, devoted to be sacrificed." Margiana, not being able to comprehend the meaning of his answer, interpreted it to refer to his condition of a slave. "Since you are clerk to the captain," said she, "no doubt you can write well. Let me see your hand." Bahram had furnished As'ad with pen, ink, and paper as a token of his office, that the queen might take him for what he designed she should. The prince stepped a little aside and wrote as follows, suitable to his wretched circumstances: "The blind man avoids the ditch into which the clear-sighted falls. Fools advance themselves to honours by discourses which signify nothing, while men of sense and eloquence live in poverty and contempt. The Mussulman, with all his riches, is miserable. The infidel triumphs. We cannot hope things will be otherwise. The Almighty has decreed it shall be so." As'ad presented the paper to Queen Margiana, who admired alike the moral of the sentences and the goodness of the writing. She needed no more to have her heart inflamed and to feel a sincere concern for his misfortunes. She had no sooner read the lines than she addressed herself to Bahram, saying, "Do which you will, either sell me this slave or make me a present of him. Perhaps it will turn most to your account to do the latter." Bahram answered insolently that he could neither give nor sell him, that he wanted his slave and would keep him. Queen Margiana, provoked at his rudeness, would not talk to him any more on the subject. She took the prince by the arm and turned him before her to the palace, sending Bahram word that if he stayed the night in her port she would confiscate his goods and burn his ship. He was therefore forced to return to his vessel and prepare to put to sea again, notwithstanding the tempest had not yet subsided. End of Section 29. Recording by M.J. Frank, Portland, Oregon.